Okay, when I say Uyghur Empire, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's this simple story, right? Nomads settle down, they trade their swords for silk, and then they kind of fade away. But what if that story is missing all the best parts? Let's dive in and see what the history books might have gotten wrong. What if, instead of just being a footnote, the Uyghurs were actually this revolutionary force that totally redefined power on the steppe? What if they pioneered economic diplomacy and created a cultural legacy that shaped empires all the way from China to Persia? Well, that's exactly the question we're going to explore. So, first things first, let's quickly go over that textbook version. You know, the neat and tidy story most of us learned in school. This is pretty much the standard take. The Uyghurs were the first Turks to give up their nomadic ways. They settled down to farm, and in doing so, they lost their warrior spirit and their military edge. It's a simple story of decline, but is it the real story? Okay, let's tackle that first big myth head-on, the idea that the Uyghurs just abandoned the steppe to settle down. The truth is, as always, way more interesting. As historian Başak Kuzakçı puts it, this whole idea is a betrayal of Turkish history. And she's right. The truth is, Turks had been building cities and settlements for centuries, going all the way back to the Asian Huns and the Gökturks. So city life was definitely not a new invention for the Uyghurs. So if they weren't the first, why the big push for mass settlement? What was going on? Well, it had nothing to do with weakness. It was all about power, and a completely new way to think about building a state. The answer was so simple, yet totally revolutionary. Taxes. Think about it. It is incredibly difficult to collect taxes from a population that's always on the move, but settled farmers and bustling cities, now that's a stable, reliable source of revenue for the state. This wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a seriously sophisticated economic move. And this massive economic shift is what allowed the Uyghurs to completely redefine power itself. And that brings us right to our next myth, the idea that they just traded their swords for silk and became a bunch of pacifists. You see, the critical thing to understand here is that they didn't get weaker. They changed the entire game. They transitioned from a state that was built purely on military might to one that was built on economic power and really sophisticated diplomacy, especially when it came to their powerful neighbor, China's Tang dynasty. Their strategy was nothing short of brilliant. First, they made themselves indispensable allies to China. Then, they did something no one else had thought of. Instead of just demanding silk as tribute like their predecessors, they basically walked in and said, "Hey, let's create a trade partnership. We'll help you sell this silk." This completely changed the dynamic from one of extortion to a mutually beneficial economic alliance. It was genius. So what do you get when you have all this economic stability and peace? Well, you get an incredible, and I mean incredible, cultural golden age that's been almost totally forgotten. And this is where the Uyghur story gets really fascinating. Let me ask you a quick question. When you think about the invention of movable type printing, what civilization comes to mind? Go on, think about it. The answer might actually surprise you. According to historian Başak Kuzakçı, the answer is definitely the Uyghurs, before China. Wow, let that sink in. This wasn't just some minor cultural achievement. We're talking about a world-changing innovation that just highlights the incredible level of development they had reached. And if you want proof of this amazing literary culture, get this. In just one archive in Berlin, just one, there are over 11,000 beautifully illuminated Uyghur Turkish manuscripts. That sheer volume of texts points to a society that had mastered paper, writing, and art on a massive scale. And here's the kicker. Their culture didn't just disappear, it spread. When the Mongol Empire exploded onto the scene, the Uyghurs basically became their tutors. They taught them everything from writing and bureaucracy to diplomacy. And as the Mongols conquered the known world, they took this Uyghur cultural and administrative DNA with them, spreading it everywhere from Iran to Anatolia. So if the Uyghurs were this innovative, this influential, why are they so often reduced to just a single sentence in our history books? Why has this incredible story been so widely forgotten? Well, there are a few key reasons. For one, scholarship has been almost laser-focused on that first Uyghur empire, completely ignoring the successor states that thrived for centuries afterward. Plus, there are literal mountains of source material in Chinese and Tibetan that just haven't been fully studied yet, leaving these huge gaps in our understanding. And that really brings us to the big takeaway here. The story of the Uyghurs is a perfect example of how easily a rich, complex history can be flattened into a simple and frankly misleading narrative. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other great civilizations and revolutionary ideas are just hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to look past the textbook summary?